It was supposed to be just another heated TV debate. The kind of segment that audiences had seen 100 times before, two guests at opposite ends of the spectrum, ready to spar under the bright studio lights. But no one in that studio, not even the producers, expected what came next. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her eyes locked, her words sharp as a blade. The comeback she delivered didn't just answer Kash Patel, it sliced through his argument so cleanly, so decisively, that the air itself seemed to shift. Patel froze, his expression stuck halfway between disbelief and embarrassment, as though the gravity of her words had knocked the breath out of him. For a split second, silence. Not the kind of silence you get from boredom, but the kind that presses down on a room to silence of shock. Then, like a wave breaking, the audience reacted. No polite applause, no scattered chuckles. A collective gasp rippled through the seats, followed by the murmurs of people looking at each other as if to say, "Did that really just happen? Cameras caught everything?" The studio lights reflected off Patel's pale expression, magnifying his unease for every viewer at home. Meanwhile, Crockett remained still, composed, her face the portrait of calm power. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't needed to. The strength of her words alone had flipped the script. Commentators would later call it a mic drop moment. The kind of exchange that lives on in clips and hashtags, replayed millions of times across timelines and news feeds. But in that raw, unfiltered second, it was more than viral content. It was the rare moment when truth punctured arrogance in real time. The audience knew it. The host knew it. Even Patel knew it. Something had shifted. A debate had turned into a reckoning, and there was no turning back. But here's the question. How did we get here? What forces led to this collision of personalities? This explosion of tension that played out live before millions? Just political theater, they are America's modern gladiator arena. Under the relentless heat of studio lights, every word is amplified, every hesitation magnified, every facial twitch broadcast into millions of homes. Politicians and pundits step into these studios not just to argue, but to stake their reputations. In front of an unforgiving audience, the stakes are high and the risks are brutal. One slip, one poorly timed smirk, and a career can be defined or destroyed by a single clip replayed endlessly online. That's what made this confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Kash Patel so electric. It wasn't just a talking heads sparring over policy. It was a cultural clash, a test of strength between dignity and mockery, truth and spin. Patel, a seasoned political operator, had entered the studio with swagger. He was ready with sharp barbs, practice lines, and the confidence of someone who had sparred on camera countless times. To him, this was another easy win, a chance to belittle, to dominate, to frame the narrative. But Crockett wasn't there to play his game. She wasn't just defending her ideas. She was defending something larger, the dignity of speaking truth without bowing to intimidation. For every viewer who had ever been mocked, dismissed, or underestimated, she became a stand-in. Every second she held her ground was a message. This isn't just about her. This is about all of us. That's why the atmosphere inside the studio was so charged. Audiences could sense the deeper stakes even before the exchange reached its breaking point. When Patel smirked, they leaned in. When Crockett paused, they held their breath. It wasn't just a battle of facts. It was a collision of worlds, his arrogance against her resilience, his mockery against her composure. What Patel failed to recognize was the quiet power behind Crockett's presence. She didn't need to shout to command attention. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Her pauses weren't hesitation, they were calculation. Beneath the poise, there was a fire. And Patel had no idea how close he was standing to the flames. Moments like these matter because they ripple beyond the studio. They travel through timelines, ignite conversations at dinner tables, and reshape how people view their leaders. When someone like Patel, confident in his ability to dominate, is suddenly disarmed by a single comeback, it exposes more than just him. It shows the audience that arrogance can be fragile. Indignity, when wielded with precision, can be unstoppable. And that's exactly why this moment hit so hard. Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself. She was channeling generations of voices who had been told to sit down, to quiet down, to stay in their place. In that instant, she made clear she wasn't going anywhere. Patel thought he had the upper hand. He thought this debate would be routine, another notch in his belt of televised sparring victories. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that Jasmine Crockett had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Kash Patel didn't stumble onto that stage by accident. He arrived there with a carefully crafted persona, one that had been tested, sharpened, and hardened in the crucible of Washington's most ruthless political wars. For years he had cultivated the image of the unflinching fighter, the man who never backed down, who could twist a headline, bulldoze an opponent, and walk away smiling as if he had just won the easiest match of his life. To his supporters, he was bold. To his critics, he was brash. But to anyone watching closely, one thing was obvious. His greatest weapon wasn't truth, it was performance. Patel built his reputation on loudness. The louder he spoke, the more certain he sounded. The more certain he sounded, the more his audience believed him. Facts were secondary, nuance irrelevant. In the theater of American politics, Patel understood that conviction often mattered more than accuracy. He embraced that reality with gusto, wielding sound bites like weapons, slashing through complexity with the confidence of someone who never paused to question whether his blade was cutting at truth or fabrication. That strategy worked for him, again and again. On television panels, he leaned into interruptions, speaking over his opponents, dismissing their arguments with a smirk or a scoff. In interviews, he wielded certainty like armor, brushing off follow-up questions with rehearsed lines designed to dominate rather than engage. His playbook wasn't subtle, but it was effective. Control the volume, command the spotlight, and leave the other side scrambling to be heard. And for a long time it worked. He rose quickly, finding his way into powerful circles where his blend of aggression and loyalty made him useful. He became known as a political opportunist, someone who could be counted on to push the narrative, no matter how implausible it seemed. That opportunism earned him both enemies and admirers. But it gave him something he valued above all: relevance, but woven into Patel's rise were the contradictions he could never escape. For all his swagger, there was an emptiness behind his words. For all his confidence, there was a fragility in his reliance on bluster. He was skilled at commanding attention, yes, but only as long as no one called his bluff. His reputation as a fighter was built less on victories of substance and more on the sheer noise of his attacks. He didn't outthink his opponents. He outshouted them, and that arrogance became his defining feature. In debate after debate, Patel carried himself as if the outcome was predetermined. He expected compliance, silence, or at the very least, hesitation from those across the table. When they faltered, as many did, it only fed his belief that he was untouchable. He mistook fear for respect, confusion for defeat. In his mind, he was invincible. Yet what Patel could never see was how predictable he had become. His cadence, his tactics, even his smirks, they were part of a script he repeated over and over. For seasoned audiences, the performance began to wear thin. For those willing to look deeper, the cracks were visible. But Patel remained blind to those cracks, too consumed by his own bravado to imagine they might one day split wide open. That night in the studio, Patel brought the same playbook he had always relied upon. He walked in with the posture of a man certain the stage belonged to him, the lights, the cameras, the audience, all of it, in his mind tilted in his favor. Crockett was just another opponent to brush aside, another chance to deliver a cutting line, another opportunity to dominate. What he didn't realize was how dangerous that overconfidence would be. Because for the first time, he wasn't up against someone scrambling to keep up, someone afraid to speak too boldly, someone who would shrink under the weight of his mockery. He was facing Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose calm was not weakness, but discipline, whose composure was not hesitation, but strength. He was facing someone who had seen arrogance before and had no intention of bowing to it. In Patel's mind, this was his arena, his performance, his victory already written. But that's the fatal flaw of the villain archetype, the belief that the show revolves around them, that their script cannot be disrupted. Patel believed his dominance was inevitable, that Crockett would play the role he assigned her, the overmatched opponent, the silenced critic, the forgettable face opposite his commanding presence. But every great downfall begins with overconfidence, and Patel had no idea what was about to hit him. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin in the halls of Congress or on the bright stage of a televised debate. It begins much earlier, in a world where the odds were stacked against her, where resilience wasn't a choice, but a necessity. Born into a system that too often underestimated women like Black, ambitious, unwilling to accept silence, Crockett had to learn early on that if she wanted to be heard, her voice couldn't waver. She had to carve out space in rooms that weren't built for her, demand respect from systems that had long denied it, fight battles that others might never even see. From the beginning, justice wasn't an abstract idea for Crockett. Lived reality. She saw how unfairness cut deep, how voices from her community were ignored, how systemic barriers pushed people down. Those injustices became the fuel that powered her journey. Instead of hardening her into cynicism, they sharpened her into action. Law school wasn't just about a degree. It was about arming herself with the tools to fight back. Each case she took on, each client she defended, was another step in her transformation from an observer of injustice to a warrior against it. The courtroom was where she first understood the true power of her voice. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was the clearest. She didn't need to shout to command attention. She needed only to speak with precision and conviction. Judges leaned in, juries listened, and opponents realized that beneath her calm exterior was a fighter who could dismantle arguments with surgical skill. For Crockett, words weren't just expressions, they were weapons. Weapons sharper than swords, able to cut through the thick armor of doubt and prejudice. But Crockett's journey wasn't without scars. Being a Black woman in politics meant enduring layers of scrutiny her peers never faced. When she raised her voice, critics labeled her angry. When she stood her ground, they called her difficult. When she succeeded, some whispered it was only because of quotas or optics. The weight of those labels could have crushed her spirit, but instead, they forged her resolve. Each insult, each dismissal, each attempt to minimize her only deepened her determination to keep rising. Her resilience didn't come from never being knocked down. It came from always standing back up. Crockett learned how to turn rejection into motivation, how to transform condescension into energy, how to let every no strengthen her fight for yes. She understood that her path wasn't just about her own success. It was about breaking barriers so others wouldn't have to face the same locked doors, and break barriers she did. Step by step, she built her reputation not as someone who played politics, but as someone who fought for people. Her advocacy for marginalized communities, her defense of those without a voice, her insistence on fairness even when inconvenient made her stand out. In a political landscape often dominated by sound bites and self-interest, Crockett's authenticity became her signature. Her rise was not meteoric, but deliberate. Each milestone was hard-earned. Each opportunity wrestled from a system hesitant to give it. Unlike Kash Patel, who thrived on opportunism and volume, Crockett thrived on preparation and substance. She studied harder, listened longer, and spoke only when she had something worth saying. That discipline became her armor. By the time she stepped into the national spotlight, Crockett was no stranger to confrontation. She had debated seasoned politicians, defended her positions against hostile critics, and endured the constant undercurrent of skepticism that followed her everywhere. And yet, through it all, she refused to let the world define her voice. Instead, she defined it herself, calm, sharp, undeniable. Her voice wasn't just the sound of her speaking, it was the embodiment of her journey. Every syllable carried the weight of her struggles, every phrase echoed the resilience of those who had come before her. When she spoke, she wasn't just Jasmine Crockett, the politician or the attorney. She was the continuation of a long line of fighters who had demanded to be heard in a society that tried to silence them. That was her power. While others relied on bluster, Crockett relied on truth. While others chased applause, she chased justice. Her presence on stage wasn't about theatrics. It was about conviction. Her voice cut through the noise not because it was the loudest, but because it was the most real. So when the cameras turned on, when the studio lights glared, and when Kash Patel walked in with his trademark arrogance, Crockett didn't flinch. She had seen men like him before, confident, dismissive, convinced that dominance was theirs by default. But Crockett had also seen what happens when that arrogance meets immovable strength. In her mind, this wasn't just a debate. It wasn't just about defending herself against Patel's interruptions or his attempts to drown her out. This was bigger. Every word she spoke carried the weight of all those who had been ignored, dismissed, or silenced. Every comeback wasn't just her on it, belonged to every young woman told she wasn't enough. Every black voice pushed to the margins. Every fighter who had ever been underestimated. Crockett knew her story had prepared her for this exact moment. Years of struggle, resilience, and determination had sharpened her voice into the perfect weapon. And now, standing across from Patel, she was ready to use it. So when Patel tried to belittle her on live TV, Crockett knew this wasn't just about her, it was about every voice that had ever been dismissed. The debate began like so many others, a clash of personalities under the unforgiving glare of studio lights. Kash Patel leaned forward in his chair, the familiar smirk tugging at his mouth, radiating the confidence of a man who thought he had mastered this stage. His words came fast, sharp, dismissive, a barrage of barbs meant to corner Jasmine Crockett before she could even gather breath. Typical, he sneered, shaking his head for dramatic effect, as if dismissing her entire existence in one condescending gesture. The audience gave a nervous chuckle, uncertain whether to laugh with him or hold their breath for what came next. Patel thrived on this kind of moment. He wielded mockery like a weapon, his tone rising louder, leaning more exaggerated with every jab. He interrupted, cut off, and waved his hand as if he could swat away her arguments like flies. Theatrics were his comfort zone, arrogance his armor. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her eyes tracked him with a quiet steadiness that unsettled more than his loudest insult. She let him talk, let him build his stage, brick by brick, louder and prouder with every word. The tension in the room grew heavy, each laugh line from Patel landing flatter than the last. The audience sensing the imbalance between noise and substance. He mocked her district. He rolled his eyes at her policies. He tossed in personal digs disguised as political critique. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, gesturing toward her dismissively, as if her presence was an inconvenience to his narrative. "This is exactly what's wrong," he declared, his voice carrying like a gavel. Loud voices, no solutions, just slogans. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The audience shifted, restless. Some murmured. Others crossed their arms. Theatrics were wearing thin, and Patel didn't notice he was burning through his last reserves of patience in the room. He had mistaken dominance for persuasion. Crockett sat poised, unshaken. Her silence became its own kind of power. Every time Patel raised his voice, she grew calmer, letting his words echo until their own hollowness betrayed him. This wasn't passivity. It was strategy. She knew that the louder he got, the more he revealed, and the more he revealed, the weaker his position became. The duel had begun. Insult versus composure. The studio lights seemed to sharpen, the atmosphere pulling tighter with each beat of silence between Patel's barbs. The camera panned, catching faces in the crowd, frowns, raised eyebrows, uneasy laughter. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was turning into a test of who would crack first under the weight of their own performance. Patel leaned in again, delivering what he thought was his finishing blow. He mocked her background, her credibility, her very right to be at the table. His voice swelled, his grin widened, and for a fleeting moment he believed he had the room in his grip. But the room was shifting. The audience wasn't clapping. They were waiting. The silence stretched longer than laughter, louder than applause. They were looking at Crockett now, not him. Waiting, expecting. And Jasmine knew it. She straightened ever so slightly, her eyes fixed on him, calm and sharp as glass. Patel kept talking, but his words were already unraveling, slipping out of rhythm. The duel had tipped, and he didn't see it yet. The tension was unbearable now. It's like the pause before lightning splits the sky. And then, with one sentence, Crockett flipped the entire debate upside down. The pause before Jasmine Crockett spoke was deliberate. She let the silence hang in the air, not rushing to fill it, not eager to parry Patel's latest insult. Silence became her weapon, slicing through the noise he had manufactured. The audience leaned in, their breath caught in the tension. Even Patel, still smirking, faltered for a flicker of a second, as if he could sense the shift in gravity. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, not raised, not hurried. It carried the weight of certainty, the confidence of someone who didn't need theatrics to command attention. "Kash," she said, her tone sharp but measured. "It's fascinating that you accuse others of being all slogans and no solutions when your entire career has been built on noise, loud, aggressive, self-serving noise." The room stilled. Gasps punctuated the silence, and a few muffled laughs bubbled up from the back rows. Patel blinked, his grin stiffening, but Crockett didn't give him room to interrupt. She controlled the floor now, with words as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "You mock me, you mock my community, you mock my background. But let's be honest, Kash, you're not here to debate ideas. You're here to play a part, to perform, to posture, to make headlines." Her pacing was flawless. She paused just long enough after each line, letting the audience absorb every syllable, letting Patel stew in the weight of his own reputation being dismantled piece by piece. And the problem with a performance, she continued, her voice firm but never rushed, is that eventually people realize it's just an act. No substance, no truth, just volume. The audience erupted in applause-sharp claps, scattered cheers, even a laugh that rang louder than the rest. Patel's smirk collapsed, his face paling as he looked around the room. Suddenly aware that the crowd he thought he had in his palm was slipping through his fingers. Crockett wasn't done, you see. "I don't need to yell to be heard. My voice doesn't have to drown out others it carries because it means something. That's what terrifies you. Because when people listen, really listen, they see right through you." Her words hit like a hammer, each blow exposing a crack. In Patel's carefully constructed persona, his trademark bravado faltered. He shifted in his seat, his shoulders tensing. For once, his mouth stayed closed. The man who never missed a chance to interrupt sat motionless, blinking as the audience turned fully against him. The reaction was electric. The audience gasped at her sharpest digs, then burst into spontaneous applause. Some laughed and not at her, but at him, at the irony of watching the self-styled aggressor crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. Every clap, every cheer, every ripple of laughter was another nail in the coffin of Patel's debate dominance. Crockett's strategy wasn't just about words, it was about rhythm, delivery, and timing. She knew Patel's greatest weapon was his volume, his ability to bulldoze conversations with noise. So she didn't meet him on that battlefield. Instead, she stripped the power from his volume by contrasting it with her calm. Every pause she held forced him to sit in silence, the very space he usually filled with bluster. Her attack wasn't wild or emotionally, was precise. She exposed the very foundation of Patel's persona, his reliance on arrogance and performance, over substance. By calling it out in front of a live audience, she turned his greatest strength into his greatest weakness. Suddenly, his loudness wasn't commanding, it was pathetic. His interruptions weren't dominance, they were insecurity, and Patel felt it. His face, once animated with smug confidence, drained of color. His jaw tightened, but no words came out. For the first time in the debate, perhaps for the first time in memory, Kash Patel looked unprepared. The silence from him spoke louder than any rebuttal. The studio audience knew they were witnessing a moment, something bigger than a debate point, bigger than a witty comeback. They were watching the collapse of a carefully cultivated persona. The room, which had been tense with anticipation moments earlier, now buzzed with energy, with laughter. With applause that refused to die down, Crockett had executed the perfect counterstrike. Not just a clapback, but a demolition of character. And the brilliance of her strategy was that it wasn't personal, it was principled. She didn't just defend herself, she reframed the entire debate. She positioned Patel not as her opponent, but as the embodiment of a larger problem: politics as performance, arrogance as a substitute for truth. Her victory wasn't just hers, it belonged to every person watching who had ever felt shouted down, dismissed, or belittled. She leaned back in her chair, eyes still steady, letting the applause wash over the moment. Her expression didn't gloat. It didn't need to. The calm certainty on her face said everything. She had waited, she had struck, and she had won. Patel, meanwhile, sat trapped in the ruins of his own bravado. He opened his mouth once, as if to respond, but closed it again when the applause drowned out whatever half-formed defense he was reaching for. His body language betrayed him, hands fidgeting, shoulders shrinking, eyes darting for escape. The contrast was brutal. Where he had once been the loudest voice in the room, he was now the quietest presence, small, diminished, eclipsed. The audience felt it. The cameras caught it. Patel knew it. It wasn't just a debate. It was humiliation. Live and unfiltered. Because Crockett hadn't simply countered him, she had exposed him. And once exposed, there was no way to retreat. No way to hide behind theatrics. This was the mic drop moment. The kind of moment that doesn't just end an argument, it defines it. The kind of moment that echoes far beyond the studio replayed. In clips, quoted in articles, remembered in whispers. Did you see when Jasmine Crockett shut Kash Patel down? And the brilliance wasn't only in what she said, but in how she said it: calm, sharp, undeniable. She had turned his performance into a punchline, his noise into nothing, his presence into absence. Patel sat there, a man undone, while Crockett sat there, the picture of composure, having dismantled him with nothing more than her voice. But the real shock wasn't just Patel's face, it was the ripple effect that followed. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her comeback, the studio was still ringing with gasps. But outside those walls, the shockwaves were just beginning. Within minutes, phones lit up, tweets fired off, and hashtags multiplied like sparks from a live wire. What had started as a tense TV debate suddenly became a cultural event, a rallying cry, and inevitably a viral sensation. On Twitter, the first clip of the exchange appeared less than 5 minutes after the debate ended. Captioned, "Simply with Jasmine Crockett did not come to play." It was retweeted thousands of times in the first hour. By midnight, the hashtag #CrockettMicDrop was trending nationally. Memes sprouted instantly. Patel's frozen pale face. Plastered onto movie posters, GIFs looping Crockett's calm expression right before the line landed. TikTok edits added dramatic slow motion, cinematic sound effects, even superhero themes. For a younger audience, it wasn't just politics, it was performance art. And Crockett had owned the stage. Commentators were quick to join the chorus. A popular progressive podcast called it the most satisfying 30 seconds of political television in years. A respected columnist wrote that Crockett's composure in the face of Patel's arrogance embodied the strength of marginalized voices who refused to be silenced. Cable networks replayed the clip on loop, often cutting to side-by-side shots. Patel's smug dismissal just moments before, and his stunned silence just after. The contrast told the entire story without a single word of narration. But what struck people most wasn't just the zinger, it was the delivery. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She let her silence stretch between words, forcing everyone to lean in. It was that poise, that refusal to descend into noise, that made her stand out. Supporters across social media compared her calmness to icons of dignity under fire. The kind of leaders who change narratives not by matching volume, but by amplifying truth. Meanwhile, Patel's silence became part of the story. For a man known for aggressive rhetoric, his pale face and stammering non-response were memified instantly. One viral tweet joked, "When the loudest guy in the room realizes he brought a water gun to a wildfire, Even conservative commentators, while scrambling to defend Patel, admitted that his reaction had handed Crockett the moment. For someone who thrived on dominance, the image of him frozen in shock was devastating. And yet, beyond the memes and the viral applause, a deeper current was forming. People began discussing why this moment resonated so strongly. It wasn't just entertainment, it was catharsis. Crockett had represented every person who'd been talked over. Dismissed, mocked and turned the tables without raising her voice. It was more than a debate clapback. It was a cultural correction. A reminder that arrogance can crumble in the face of composed truth. Op-ed sprouted the next morning. One headline read, "The Power of Poise, Why Crockett's Silence Was Louder Than Patel's Words." Another, "The future of political debate belongs to leaders like Jasmine Crockett." Supporters, especially from immigrant communities and marginalized groups, saw themselves in her resilience. She reminded us that we don't have to shout to be heard. One viral Facebook post read, "Our dignity is our sharpest weapon." The ripple effects reached even further. Students debated the clip in classrooms. Activists replayed it in training sessions. And late-night hosts turned it into their opening jokes. Crockett had crossed into mainstream culture, not as just another politician, but as a symbol of what it means to hold the line against mockery. But in the middle of all the celebration, there was also reflection. The memes and hashtags were fun, but many asked, what does this teach us? What can we carry from this moment into the battles ahead? Because as much as people enjoyed Patel's humiliation, the resonance wasn't only about his downfall, it was about Crockett's example. She showed that integrity can win over arrogance, and that composure can shatter louder voices. And as social media kept looping Patel's stunned face, quieter truth was sinking in. Sometimes the most powerful part of a confrontation isn't the words that land, it's the silence that follows. The silence that forces arrogance to reckon with itself. Yet beyond the laughs and memes, a bigger lesson was quietly unfolding. When the noise of the moment faded and the memes had run their viral course, what lingered was not just the thrill of a comeback, it was the deeper meaning beneath it all. The clash between Jasmine Crockett and Kash Patel was more than a fiery exchange on live television. It was a timeless battle between truth and arrogance, dignity and mockery, restraint and bluster. And in that battle, the victor was not the one who spoke the loudest, but the one who held her ground with grace. Patel's role in this drama was familiar, the voice of arrogance. Brimming with confidence that truth could be dismissed with a smirk, he embodied the kind of mockery that feeds on silence, the assumption that if you talk over someone long enough, their words will lose their power. But Crockett refused to play by that script. She represented something far more enduring: resilience. She stood as proof that dignity, carried with composure, is stronger than any insult. Her measured delivery transformed what could have been just another political spat into something universal. Everyone has known a Patel in their life. Someone who scoffs at sincerity, someone who mocks instead of listens. And everyone, at some point, has longed for the chance to respond. Not with rage, not with noise, but with quiet strength. Crockett gave voice to that longing. In her silence between words, in the calm that framed her comeback, she reminded the world that true power doesn't need to shout. The emotional crescendo of the moment. That came not in Crockett's words alone, but in the silence that followed them. Silence in that instant was louder than any microphone could project. It was Patel's silence that sealed the exchange, a silence that became a mirror for his own arrogance. It was Crockett's silence, steady and unbroken, that magnified her dignity. The world saw that sometimes it is not the clash of voices that decides the winner, but the weight of stillness that follows. And this is why the moment matters far beyond politics. It isn't just about Democrats or Republicans, about one TV segment or one politician's reputation. It's about something more enduring, the way human dignity shines when tested by ridicule. Crockett's example reminds us that battles of respect are fought in classrooms, workplaces, living rooms, not just on live TV. Whenever arrogance tries to belittle truth, whenever mockery tries to drown out dignity, there is an opportunity to stand tall without needing to shout. It is tempting in our culture to think that the loudest voice wins. Social media rewards outrage, television rewards spectacle, and politics often feels like a shouting match. But Crockett's moment turned that assumption upside down. She proved that silence, when wielded with purpose, can dismantle arrogance more effectively than 1,000 loud rebuttals. It was a lesson written not in slogans, but in stillness, a lesson that touched something deeply human. Her comeback was sharp. Yes, but it was her composure that elevated it into a symbol. For those watching, it wasn't just entertainment, it was affirmation. Affirmation that dignity can survive mockery. Affirmation that resilience can expose arrogance. Affirmation that truth, even delivered softly, carries a weight that no insult can erase. The story of that night will be remembered in memes and hashtags, replayed in TikToks and commentary clips. But its true legacy is something quieter, something more personal. It is the reminder that we, too, can choose how we respond when faced with arrogance. We can meet noise with noise, or we can stand, like Crockett, in the calm confidence that silence sometimes speaks louder. And so, in the end, this was not merely about a politician defeating an opponent. It was about a universal truth that human dignity, when protected with composure, can outshine the loudest arrogance. Crockett's moment belongs not just to her, but to anyone who has ever been dismissed, mocked, or underestimated, because in an age of noise and laughter, sometimes silence tells the real story. And so the moment ended exactly as the title promised. Jasmine Crockett stunned Kash Patel. His face said it all. That frozen silence, that unspoken admission, became the final punctuation mark of the exchange. It wasn't just television, it was a live demonstration of how arrogance collapses when confronted by truth wrapped in dignity. The lesson is unmistakable. No matter how sharp the mockery, no matter how smug the smirk, arrogance always underestimates resilience. Crockett didn't need to out-yell Patel. She didn't need to trade insult for insult. Instead, she showed that composure carries its own authority. In the end, truth always outshines arrogance. Dignity always stands taller than ridicule. This is why her moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't only about politics or left versus right. It was about the universal struggle between those who belittle and those who endure. Her response echoed far beyond the studio walls, reminding everyone watching that strength is not measured in decibels, but in the courage to remain steady when others try to shake you. And now, here's where you come in. If moments like this remind you why truth matters, why dignity deserves defending, don't let it end with a meme or a headline. Subscribe. Share this story with a friend, and stay ready. Because as powerful as this confrontation was, the next one will be even bigger. And when it comes, the world will once again be reminded, in an age of noise, arrogance may laugh the loudest, but truth always has the last word.